She's a liar, always has been. My father's voice cut across Daniel's parents' dining table so sharply that his mother stopped reaching for the serving bowl. I stared at Dad. What are you doing? He didn't even look at me. He looked straight at the man I was supposed to marry in 14 days. You deserve to know what you're marrying into, Daniel, Dad said. Melvis has a secret child. Daniel's face changed. Mom leaned toward him. Don't let her trap you too. Mom. She ignored me. Dad continued. She got pregnant when she was 20, hid it, had a little girl. Then when being a mother became inconvenient, she walked away. Daniel slowly turned toward me. For years, my parents had learned exactly how to use my silence against me. If I defended myself, I was dramatic. If I refused to expose private family business, my silence became proof of guilt. Daniel's voice was quieter than everyone else's. Melvis, is there a girl? I could have lied. Instead, I said, yes. Mom lowered her eyes, as though my answer had proven everything. Daniel swallowed. Is she your daughter? I looked at my parents. Dad was almost smiling. I won't discuss her in front of them. Dad leaned back triumphantly. See, she can't even deny it. Daniel, I said, pushing my chair back, come outside with me. I'll talk to you privately. But Daniel didn't stand. Instead, he reached into his pocket. My stomach tightened when he pulled out his phone. Dad's smile disappeared. Daniel unlocked the screen. Actually, there's something all three of you need to see. He turned the phone toward me. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe. There I was at 20 years old, standing outside the apartment building where I'd lived back then. My hair was tied up messily. My face looked exhausted. And in my arms was a baby. Grace. I hadn't seen that photograph in years. Where did you get that? I whispered. Someone sent it, anonymously, this morning. Daniel swiped across the screen. It was a scan showing the back of the photograph. 4 words had been written beneath the date. Melvis and her little girl. I looked at Dad. His fingers tightened around his water glass. That tiny movement told me something I hadn't known 5 seconds earlier. This hadn't been a spontaneous confession. Someone had planned it. Daniel turned the phone toward my parents. Richard, Diane. Neither answered. Daniel enlarged the photograph until the baby's face filled the screen. Then he asked the question that made my father's expression finally crack. Is this the child you're talking about? Mom answered before Dad could. That's her. Her certainty made Daniel look back at the photograph. Dad nodded. Melvis kept the child for a while. Then responsibility became inconvenient, so she left her with relatives. I stared at him. You know that's not what happened. Then tell him what happened, Dad shot back. Daniel placed his phone on the table. Melvis, I need one clear answer. Did you give birth to the baby in that picture? No. Dad actually laughed. There it is. She's rewriting history again. But Daniel wasn't watching him anymore. He was watching me. He must have noticed that I wasn't frightened of the photograph itself. I was staring at my parents, trying to understand how they'd gotten something that should never have been in their hands. Daniel finally stood. Melvis, outside. We stepped onto the back patio and closed the door behind us. Who is she? He asked. Her name is Grace. Your parents say she's your daughter. She isn't. Then why were you raising her? That question hurt because it was closer to the truth. Grace meant everything to me, I said. I helped raise her. For a long time, I was the person taking care of her. Daniel rubbed his forehead. And we've been together 4 years. Why have I never heard this? Because there are things about Grace's birth that aren't mine to reveal. Melvis, we're getting married in 2 weeks. I know. Marriage can't survive secrets this big. I agree, but I'm not destroying someone else's privacy just to prove I'm innocent. Daniel stared at me for several seconds. Then let Grace tell me. I looked away. We haven't properly spoken in almost a year. Why? Every time Grace tried getting close to me again, my parents interfered. Eventually, communication became difficult. Daniel said nothing. Later that night, while I sat alone in our bedroom, he searched through old messages and photographs until he found Grace's full name. Then he found her social media account. He typed, "I'm marrying Melvis. Her parents say you're her daughter. I need the truth." He pressed send. Less than 5 minutes later, his phone vibrated. Once, then again, and again. Daniel opened the conversation. Grace had sent him 11 photographs asterisk. The final attachment was different. A scanned birth certificate. Daniel enlarged it and stared at the names printed across the document. Then he looked toward the bedroom door, where I was sitting on the other side. He suddenly understood that somebody had been lying to him. And it wasn't me. 3 days later, Daniel placed his phone face down on the table at our family wedding planning gathering. Both families were there. Then he looked directly at Dad. "Tell them what you told me about Grace." Dad blinked. "Why?" "Because if Melvis has been lying to everyone, there's no reason to keep this private." Mom immediately stepped in. "We kept quiet because we were protecting Melvis." Dad nodded. "She had a child, she abandoned her. That's the truth." A strange silence moved around the table. Then Aunt Rebecca frowned. "Grace." Dad's eyes snapped toward her. Rebecca looked at the photograph Daniel had opened on his phone. "Richard, why are you calling Grace Melvis's daughter?" "Rebecca," Dad said sharply, "stay out of this." That reaction changed the room. Several relatives exchanged glances. They recognized Grace. And clearly, Dad hadn't expected anyone to question his version. Instead of backing down, he pointed at Daniel. "You should postpone this wedding until Melvis finally admits what she did." My chest tightened. This wasn't about warning Daniel anymore. My parents wanted the wedding stopped. Daniel remained strangely calm. If Melvis abandoned Grace, who raised her afterward? "We did," Dad answered. "When?" Dad gave him the year. Daniel picked up his phone and checked something. I watched his expression harden. "What?" Dad demanded. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Daniel had Grace's documents, and the dates didn't match Dad's story. Still, he didn't show anyone. Instead, he locked his phone and stood. "The wedding is happening." Dad's face darkened. "You're making a mistake." "That's my decision. You'll regret trusting her." Daniel didn't answer. And because he still hadn't shown me what Grace had sent him, I couldn't tell whether he believed me completely or was simply refusing to let my father control him. Then his phone vibrated. Daniel glanced down. A message from Grace filled the screen. She had heard about our rehearsal dinner. And underneath, that was another message. "Don't tell Melvis I'm coming. They already stole enough from her. I'll tell everyone myself." The night before our wedding, Dad cornered Daniel beside the bar at our rehearsal dinner. "You still have time to stop this." Daniel glanced toward the entrance. "I'm waiting for someone." I heard him. "Waiting for who?" Before Daniel could answer, Dad tapped his glass with a spoon. Everyone turned. He hadn't been scheduled to give a toast. That was the first thing that made my stomach drop. "The foundation of any successful marriage," Dad began, "is honesty." Mom sat beside him with her hands folded neatly in her lap. I knew exactly where this was going. Dad was about to tell Daniel's entire family that I'd abandoned a child. But Daniel stood. "Actually, Richard, before you continue, there's something everyone should see." He connected his phone to the private dining room's screen. The photograph appeared. 20-year-old me. A baby in my arms. Whispers moved through the room. Dad pointed toward it. "There, that's exactly what I've been trying to tell you." Daniel faced him. Confirm something for everyone. You're saying that baby is Melvis's daughter. Yes. Daniel looked at Mom. Diane. She nodded. Yes. You're both absolutely certain. Dad's jaw tightened. How many times do we have to say it? Daniel glanced at me. And suddenly, pieces began falling into place. The way Aunt Rebecca had recognized Grace. The year Dad claimed he and Mom had started raising her. The documents Daniel kept checking. And Grace herself, carrying the Carter surname in the records he'd received. Daniel wasn't questioning my parents because he believed them. He was giving them every opportunity to commit to their lie. Dad turned toward me. Enough hiding, Melvis. Tell everyone what you did to Grace. I opened my mouth. The dining room doors swung open behind him. Every head turned. A young woman stood in the doorway, holding a large envelope against her chest. For a second, I couldn't move. Her hair was different. She was older now, but I knew those eyes immediately. Grace. She looked at me first, then at our parents. Dad went completely still. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Grace stepped into the room. She didn't abandon me, she said. Her eyes stayed locked on them. You two did. Grace crossed the room without looking at anyone else and wrapped her arms around me. I held her so tightly, the envelope between us crumpled. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then she turned toward the room. My name is Grace Carter. Melvis is not my mother. Dad stepped forward. Grace, this isn't the place. No, you don't get to decide that anymore. The room went silent. Melvis is my sister. Mom lowered her head. Grace explained what my parents had spent years forcing us to hide. Mom became pregnant with Grace during a temporary separation from Dad. When they reconciled, Dad agreed to remain in the marriage and publicly raise Grace, but only if the circumstances surrounding her birth stayed private. Years later, their marriage fell apart again. Mom disappeared for a period. And Dad refused to take responsibility for Grace because she wasn't biologically his. I was 20, I said quietly. Grace looked at me, and you stayed. She told everyone what that meant. I arranged childcare, bought diapers and formula, took Grace to appointments, rearranged work and everything else in my life around a baby I hadn't created but refused to abandon. Grace pointed toward the photograph still displayed behind us. That isn't a mother with the child she abandoned. That's my sister holding me when our parents wouldn't. Dad's face tightened. I was trying to protect this family. Grace opened her envelope. Then explain this. She removed the original photograph. Daniel walked over and held his phone beside it. The anonymous scan he'd received contained the words Melvis and her little girl. Grace's original contained only a date. No description. No handwriting suggesting I was her mother. Daniel looked at Dad. You added it. Dad said nothing. That silence answered for him. Grace continued. When Mom came back, they took responsibility for me again. Then they made Melvis promise not to talk about what happened because people would ask questions about my birth and about why she'd been raising me. I had kept that promise because Grace deserved control over her own history. My parents had taken that silence and turned it into a weapon. Daniel came to me. I owe you an apology. You asked questions, I said. I doubted you. For a moment, then you looked for the truth instead of choosing their version. Grace faced our parents. Her voice shook now, but she didn't look away. The person you've spent 2 weeks calling a liar is the reason I had someone when neither of you wanted the responsibility. Mom started crying. Grace, please. No, Mom. Dad tried again. Everything we did was to protect the family. Aunt Rebecca stood from her chair. By telling everyone Melvis abandoned her own child. Nobody defended him. Daniel stepped beside me. Richard, Diane, You're no longer participating in our wedding." Dad stared at him. "Excuse me." "You heard me." Then Daniel looked directly at Dad. "You won't be walking Melvis down the aisle." Mom wiped her face. Daniel continued, "And the mother-daughter part of tomorrow's ceremony is canceled." Several relatives who had believed my parents came to me that evening and apologized. Others confronted Dad after realizing he deliberately altered the context of the photograph. Grace made her own decision clear. "I won't lie about this anymore." Neither would I. I didn't launch some public campaign against my parents. I didn't need to. Their power had always depended on one thing: our silence. That was gone. The next afternoon, the wedding happened exactly as planned. Almost. Dad wasn't beside me when the doors opened. I walked down the aisle without him. And when I looked toward the front row, Grace was there. My sister. Not my secret child. Not evidence of some shameful past. My sister. After the wedding, Grace and I slowly began rebuilding the relationship our parents had spent years disrupting. Daniel entered our marriage knowing the truth, and my parents discovered that family secrets could no longer be used to control either of us. They tried to destroy my future by rewriting my past. Instead, they lost their place in both. My parents tried to end my marriage by telling my fiancé I'd abandoned my child. But when Grace finally walked through that door, everyone learned who had actually abandoned her.